All right, so I've been playing the new Obelisk update over on Space Marines 2. I went over the patch in a separate video, but the long and short of it is that there was a new operation added, new Majoris enemy, changes to melee combat, future changes they talked about to firearms, and a wide variety of other quality of life things that I don't want to get into in this video. But what I want to talk about in this video is I wanted to focus in on the melee portion of that patch, because there was quite a lot of changes. They were trying to get us away from this parry gun strike meta that is in the game, because that's really the best way to maximize your damage in melee combat. So they wanted to get us away from that, and their attempt was to make some changes to the block system, and we're going to get into that right now. So basically, just to headline what they talked about in the patch, they basically increased melee damage across the board. They added a perfect block system that also inherently added an adrenaline surge system, which how that works is when you perfectly block something, you also get stacks of adrenaline surge. And when you reach the maximum adrenaline surge, which is 3 stacks, your next melee will cause this massive AoE, dealing a lot more damage, staggering enemies, and also recovering some of your armor. And also they made some changes to balanced weapons by increasing the damage across the board on all different versions of it by 10%, as well as they did increase the damage for block weapons by 20% across all the different versions. There was a number of bugs and issues added with this patch, and the one that people are screaming about is the fencing one. I've got it flooded in my comments in the video that I released. But the thing that the developers have said on Discord and in X, I believe, is that this is a bug. It's not intended to be like that. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, basically with the fencing, you're able to parry in multiple directions without needing to like readjust. But now you're only able to parry in front of you. That's a bug. Apparently, from what they said, don't shoot the messenger if it doesn't get fixed. But what I'm saying is that from what they're saying is that it's a bug and it's going to be fixed eventually. The balanced version of the weapons still do the kind of parry in multiple directions without you having to switch directions. So use the balanced options for now, as I stated before. But yeah, that's just a bug. Like I said, I've been able to play some operations missions and go in and test this new blocking feature. And my thoughts in a summary nutshell are the following. The pros are that I do enjoy the fact that Focus is trying to give us a different way of doing melee combat, because I will admit, having to rely on the parry gun strike meta in order to really maximize your character's damage is a little bit boring. So adding a feature that's going to make you think differently in melee combat is quite nice. I actually like that, because block beforehand was just completely useless. There was absolutely no reason to run it because you didn't get anything. You couldn't recover your armor from a perfect parry. You can recover your armor from perfectly parrying Majoris enemies. And then also you can perfectly parry, get gun strikes to maximize your damage. So there was no reason really to run it. But now with the adrenaline surge thing, and also the fact that the block system is a little bit better, it does actually give you some more reasons to run it. But again, the application is what I have a problem with. So from everything I can see, when you actually perfectly block something, you don't necessarily get an armor segment back, which is fine, but there's really no way to get armor back unless you actually get the full stacks of adrenaline surge, which getting that is really, 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 really difficult without having to force it, right? The good thing about the perfectly parry system is that you can actually use it well in the flow of combat. It feels natural. But with the block system, it feels so unnatural, and it's not necessarily just because we've been using this perfect parry system so long, because that's what I thought it was, but no, legitimately, you're having to actually think, oh, I need to like actually try and get these enemies to hit me so I can get enough stacks and make this surge happen. And it's just really rough around the edges. I don't like it. The change I would like to see with that is I would love to see them actually make it to where you actually can use the adrenaline surge thing and get the AoE effect without having to have the full stack. So meaning if you have 1, you can do it. If you have 2 or 3, you can do it regardless of the number you have, because at least you'll be able to get something out to be able to make, you know, some sort of effect to make blocking worth it. Because right now you get 1 or 2 stacks, you'll do a little bit more melee damage, but you won't recover your armor segments. You won't get the AoE effect to get the stagger effect, because that's another thing about the perfect parry system, is that when you perfectly parry something, there is a stagger effect that goes out. The fencing one was actually brought down a little bit, but it's still there. The balanced one is bigger, but the point is that there's a stagger effect that staggers the enemies around you so that way you can do a little bit more damage to whatever you're targeting. But I digress. The point that I'm trying to make is that I like the idea of the block system. It's just rough around the edges. All right, so jumping in game real quick, I wanted to go over some of the things that I noticed when testing most of the weapons in the game, because there's quite a few nuances and some new versions of the weapons that I think are overall better. So starting with the bulwark, there was quite a few things that were interesting. So you can see here that they added the perfectly blocked thing to some of the descriptions, meaning with like defensive advantage, for example, a perfectly timed parry or block creates a shock area around you for 5 seconds. So you can notice that they added perfectly parry and perfectly blocked. But if you go over to something like intimidating aura, a perfectly timed parry deals area of effect damage within 5 meters. Now I'm not sure if this is a glitch or a bug, or if this really is intended just to be for perfectly parry, but it seems like some perks in the game they parry and block, or block in this case, and some don't. So that's pretty interesting in my opinion. All right, so for the power sword, we have quite a few different interesting things that we had happen based on the changes. So primarily before the patch, I had been using the fencing option just like everybody else, because it was just the best, because the perfectly parry window was much higher, and then it's much faster than the other ones, and just in general, the strength is really good for how fast it is. But now I've been playing around with the balanced options because I thought those are actually much more interesting with the damage increases. So now with the power sword, and this is and exists before, you get 2 different balanced options. One of the balanced options has a little bit lower strength, a little bit slower speed, but a high cleave potential. The other one has much higher strength and also has a decent speed, a little bit slower than the fencing one, but it has good enough speed in my opinion. So this is the one I focused in on to try out. This weapon actually feels really, really good. Not only does it feel just a touch stronger compared to the fencing option, which is great, the speed doesn't really bother me too much. So I will say that for this particular weapon, the balanced one is one that you really need to take a look at, because it's actually not as egregiously bad anymore in comparison. Yes, of course, if you struggle with perfectly parry, it is going to be a big difference for you. It's going to take a minute to adjust, but if you can adjust to it and actually time your parries a little bit better, the balance option here is actually a better version. Now the blocking option, again, like I spoke before, I'm not going to cover this too much because I went over my rant on blocking already, is a little interesting because it does have a bit higher speed than the balanced version, and it also has a much higher cleave, and the damage is a little bit lower than all the other options, and it more compares to the other balance option with cleave. So this one again is interesting, and I thought it had more potential than any of the other options because of the higher cleave and then the higher speed. But again, with the blocking thing, it just doesn't feel very good. But for me personally, with the power sword, now with the changes, I feel like that the Imperator's blade, can't speak, is the better option, and you should be going for that version. Now jumping over to the knife, this is a little bit of a different story, and one that I find really interesting. So we got the 2 options. Obviously I was using the fencing version, which was great, but again, based on the changes, I think that balance feels pretty good because I did try them both, and it is much, much, much faster, which is nice. But the blocking one is just stupidly strong now compared to the other 2. And it's interesting because these 2 didn't really see much of a change in terms of strength, but man, that block one, that thing is freaking sweet. It has 16 strength. That is just dumb, in my opinion, and does not take a real big hit in the speed department, which is nice. I was giving this one a shot, and honestly, out of all the melee weapons I used with the blocking mechanic, this one felt the best. So if you want to try to get the blocking mechanic down, maybe you do it with the knife. But again, it's just one of those situations where you got to get used to the blocking mechanic. But the balance one here feels very, very nice once again. So you should be using the balanced version for the knife. Now the chainsword is where things get completely out of whack, and I haven't quite figured out which one I like the most. Again, I was using the fencing version a lot before. Now, I don't like the balanced one. My freaking goodness, is this thing terrible. I mean, it has amazing strength. It has 16 strength, which is great, but the speed is so freaking punishing. This was an issue before the patch. It's not related to the patch, but I was hoping that the balance option will feel a little bit better. No, it feels terrible. The fencing option is by far still the best version of the Chainsword in my opinion, but the blocking one is pretty interesting because it doesn't really drop your stats too much on the speed and keeps your cleave potential a little, it actually raises your cleave potential, and you get the ludicrous strength, which is great. But again, like the fencing one, because of the perfectly parry thing, feels the best because the Chainsword is meant to feel a little faster and more aggressive in combat, and you're supposed to get into like kind of a flow state. With the perks and things like that, being able to do the stomps and the shoves and the kicks and stuff. And the blocking mechanic doesn't really work because it's more of a defensive thing, and you're not really using it in an aggressive stance. So over on the Thunder Hammer, we have a really interesting story with this because I found myself conflicted because, again, just like the Chainsword, this is meant for you to be kind of slowly aggressive because this is overall a slow weapon. So I really like the blocking version because it increased that speed just a hair compared to the other two versions, which was very nice. And you also got more strength, and the cleave was really good. But the problem is in the flow state of combat and the way with Assault works, it doesn't work well because Assault is really driven off getting gun strikes. Gun strikes are much more far and few between with the block build on the Thunder Hammer, so it doesn't make much sense. So the balanced version feels pretty good here. I would say that you get a little bit of an upgrade overall in terms of strength and cleave, which is nice. You're going to be able to hit more enemies, which is very, very nice. And just in general, like I said before, balanced if you get good with the perfectly parry system and actually timing it well and not so reliant on fencing doing most of the work, you'll be able to actually really benefit from the extra cleave and damage you get from the Thunder Hammer. So yeah, I would jump on the balanced option for the Thunder Hammer. So to encapsulate my thoughts and just give some more general feedback to the developers on how they can fix block in general to make it more of a viable option. One thing, again, like I said before, outside of the things where I talked about making the stacks of Adrenaline Surge more accessible in the earlier stages so you don't have to get 3 full stacks in order to get the surge effect to happen. One thing I would like to see is I would like to see them actually make it to where when you block somebody, like perfectly block, maybe they get staggered back for a second, or maybe they knock back other enemies because they're stunned from the block or something like that. Why can't we get any of that? Also, why don't they make it to where if you get 2 stacks instead of 3, you get an armor segment back, because that's more likely to happen than to get 3, and maybe when you get 3, maybe get a portion of health back. I don't know. Why don't they add something that gives you some more survivability so that way you're more encouraged to go for 3 stacks as opposed to just going for 1 or 2? They need to just make it a little bit more interesting outside of just that, because I feel like the perfect parry system is still by far the best system and the most consistent system when you're in the state of flow of melee combat in this game. So yeah, it's a good attempt, but it still needs a lot of work. Anyways, I just wanted to go on a brief tirade because I know a lot of people have been complaining about the changes and not really happy with it, but there were some good things that came out of this. Use the balanced weapons because they're a lot better than they were before. Get good at timing the parries a little bit with that, and you'll be thanking me later because they are much better. And then just slowly try to get used to the block mechanic, because I do feel like it's going to change a little bit more over time if you want to. But again, I'm personally not going to be using it too much because I become too reliant on the gun strike meta. But at the same time, I do like the idea of what they're trying to do. But anyways, guys, that's all I got for now. I'll see you in the next video. Peace.